to the Bayview Podcast with hosts Andrew Clark and Chris Emery. This is designed to be a discussion on all things life and faith. We hope this serves as a weekly resource and encouragement to you.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Chris. Welcome to the Bayview Podcast. I am doing the intro for the first time ever. This is our 77th episode, I think, something like that. And
look at you.
Yeah, I know. I realized as we were getting the countdown from our producer that, oh, wait, I've never done the intro. Andrew does the intro. So my regular co-host, Andrew Clark, is he's out of the studio today. He and his wife welcomed a brand new baby daughter this week, their third child. And so he's home loving on his family as he should be. And we're super happy for them. And so perfect timing because we have a regular co-host guest.
I know, I'm like a frequent flyer now.
I was like, I don't think we can call you a guest anymore. I think you have to be like a fill-in co-host because you've been here enough now.
I'm down with that.
Yeah, you're not a guest anymore, and you do this professionally anyway. But yeah, we have Rachael Jenneman back with us today. She here at Bayview this last week, she gave the teaching and just took us down a tough topic. And so it was perfect timing to have her back on so we can kind of break it down a little bit more and keep going. So step one, how are you doing today?
I'm doing okay. I'm cold, but I'm all right. It's warm in here, and I'll take it.
Yes, it is. Typically our studio is too warm.
I would rather have too warm than too cold.
Yeah.
Hands down. 100%.
I can't do too warm. There have been times where maybe like somebody's been talking, maybe Andrew, maybe not, and I can feel my eyes rolling. Not because I'm bored, because I'm so warm. I just want to take a nap. But right now it's like -2 outside.
Yes.
So I'll take a
I have an
nice
electric
warm.
blanket for my car, so it sits right on my lap. It's fabulous. It's fantastic.
Don't tell my wife that. She would love that. That's totally her vibe. So, but yeah, well, good. So this last Sunday, we continued our teaching series on relationships. And so here on the podcast, we're going to continue to have those dialogues and conversations. And we tackled a topic that is often, I don't want to say all the time, but it's often one that's not brought up when you're doing relationship discussions.
Right.
It's the whole idea of like, okay, hold on a second. I hear about parenting and marriage, but I'm single.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you got? What do you got for me?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to put words in their mouth, but there's often times I know I've come off stage and preached about dating or relationships, and I have like that individual waiting, and they're kind of like they're a little bothered.
Yeah.
And they're like, "Hey, what's up? I'm single. Now what you got?" Right? And I'm like, yeah, let's talk about that. Yeah. Whoops. My bad. So you were given this topic weeks and weeks ago. I don't know, initial thought, like you're like, okay, I got to preach on God's plan for singles or a teaching for the singles. Like, what was your initial approach and thought?
Well, my first thought is, who's going to want to hear from me?
Yeah.
Because I'm married.
Right.
Like, great, another married person telling me what to do. But I don't know what it was, but yes, I love TikTok. And so as going through TikTok, it was just all these videos of singles popping up, and just so my algorithm is all messed up. They must think I'm single or something because I'm getting all these videos. But my heart just began to burden for them, and I began to just build a compassion and learn more about what it is to be single when you're in your 30s or your 40s, or even just being in your early 20s today and trying to navigate this single life in a culture that is just incredibly toxic. It's over-sexualized. And even people in the church, I have friends in their 30s and they're going, I try to go on a date with a Christian guy, but he doesn't want to wait till we're married to have sex. So I'm going, well, what the heck? Like, at least I thought in the church I would find somebody that shared my values, and I can't even find someone in the church that shares my values. And so my heart just began to burden for them, and my prayer really was just, please let them receive from someone who's married. No, I may not be in the boat that you are. No, I may have been married for some time now, but my heart is for you. Is for you. I don't want to condemn you because you're single or because you feel the way you do, but my heart is for you.
Sure. Good. And I think that's a good part. And I think sometimes Society does for sure, and I think we fall into it naturally. Sometimes as the church, just in our lingo and some of our terminology, we accidentally alienate the people that aren't a couple.
Right.
And so we use terms like families and couples and spouses and I think I heard this first from a couple of our single moms, and they were sharing how many times they've accidentally been hurt at church. And they feel like the spotlight's extra on them already. And then we, and I can't remember the exact context, but basically I think it was at a church where a pastor was bringing families on stage, and he said, "All right, husbands, help your wife up here." And she's like, "Okay, I don't have a husband.
I don't have that."
And here I am on stage, and now everybody sees I don't have a husband. That wasn't his intent. He didn't mean to do that. But I think sometimes we just, we kind of put it two together, like, well, you're supposed to be husband and wife or boyfriend, girlfriend. And the hard truth is there are a lot of people who are single, and that's the story God's writing.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's all of you. But I do think that it's a pretty big topic too. So if we say single, I mean, think about all the things that entails. It involves, you were just sharing a few moments ago, you have a daughter that's on the back end of high school, right? So of course she's single, like as far as like she's not married,
right.
like they're dating. But so you have these young, adults that are single and haven't found their spouse yet. You have the whole middle ground of, middle-aged adults who are still single and struggling with it. You have individuals who are divorced and single again. And then you also have the whole group of people who were married for 30 or 40 years and lost their spouse, and now they're newly single. And this is a whole different world again.
Right.
And so, I mean, that's each one within themselves has a whole thing to unpack. But it all comes back to one thing you pointed out Sunday, and that is that it's kind of been the theme of this whole teaching series, is that we were not made to be alone.
Right.
Right. I mean, how do you see that then? What challenges does that bring up? Because the longing to not be alone seems like it should be like, well, then God, you're letting me down if I'm single. But that's not really the teaching that you gave us, right? And the way you see it.
Well, what's hard is for the single, they have to be way more intentional. For the married, well, you go home to somebody every night. But then we could talk about this later, because there's also that dynamic. Just because you go home to somebody doesn't mean that you
that's a whole different, that's marriage. That's a whole different, yeah, exactly.
But you have to be more intentional, which is difficult because you're trying to build your career, you're trying to do all these things, or you're trying to take care of aging parents or whatever. And you just have to be intentional of being about God's business. And God's business is people. So if you can be about God's business, whether it's being a part of a small group, working with different ministries or whatever, but then also surrounding yourself with family. And that's hard to do, especially if a job takes you 1,000 miles away from your family. Now you have to be intentional to get yourself into a church family and to get yourself involved in ministry there, or to be involved in your workplace. It's something that has to be intentional. And I don't envy that.
Right.
Because there's that part of you, whether you're single or you're married, you want to be invited in. You don't want to say, hey, come invite me in. I mean, I'll do that, but a lot of people don't want to do that.
Right.
They want to be invited in, and as those that are married, or maybe we're single but we have children and our focus is on our kids, we also kind of need to be intentional too, and say, oh, that person might be lonely. Why don't I invite them over? Why don't I invite them for coffee? Why don't we? But we're so busy as a society, we're not thinking about other people.
Yeah.
And the fact that they might be lonely.
Yeah. And busyness is a really nice way of saying we're pretty selfish. Typically. If I'm busy, it's because I'm selfish, typically. If I'm too busy to see others, I should say.
Yeah.
So I think it really then comes down to that's actually a really important thing to grasp, is that for the single person, they want you to invite them. They don't want to have to, quote unquote, invite themselves, right? Nobody wants to do that. Very few of us would even try that. So they want to be wanted. They want to be seen. And when they're not invited and then they feel not seen, well, then they feel like there's just nobody for me.
Right.
And now this loneliness creeps in. And I think that we're dealing with that. I think that being single and being lonely are two very different things. It just happens to usually be together. As you said, there are people that are not single and they're super lonely. I have students. I talk to students when I travel and speak to high school and even college students who live at home. They have mom, dad, brothers or sisters. They're still lonely. So that it's not isolated. But for the single person, yeah, you're right. They go home alone. They maybe go home to a pet, whatever. But we're made for companionship. That's what God noticed early on. He had Adam there. We don't know how long Adam was working in the garden, but he was going about the Lord's work, right? He was going about the business of God. And in the midst of that, God recognized in order for Adam to fulfill his calling, both as taking charge of the creation God had given him to oversee and multiplying the earth. Wasn't going to do that alone.
Yeah.
So he needed to have a companion. And I find that's where so many people are hungering, is they just want a companion on this life walk. And that's not easy.
No, not in this world.
Yeah.
I mean, it used to be years ago, and I'm just going to take females as an example. Females, a lot of times they married right outside of high school. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
And then over the years, women have that freedom to start careers and get educated, and all of that is wonderful. Neither one is bad. However, women nowadays don't have a choice. They have to get educated. They have to get a career. They have to be super independent because they don't know when they're going to get married or if they're going to get married. And then if they do find somebody and they get married, now all of a sudden they have to learn how to be, in a sense, dependent on somebody else and someone else dependent on them, where they've been trained for so long. No, I have to be independent and I have to have this career and I have to push and climb the ladder because it's the only way I'm going to survive. Now all of a sudden I have to adjust. And I mean, that's really difficult.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a little bit easier for a guy because you're expected to kind of do all those things. And when you get married, you're the provider of the family.
Right.
And all. So I think it's a little bit, I'm not saying it's easy for them because obviously being independent and depending on a wife is difficult. I'm not saying it's not, but to make that switch. But I think it is a little bit harder for the females.
Yeah, I can see that. And I can see, again, just because of the social constructs that have been historical, at least in our culture, it has been that. And you say that. I think my mom got married pretty much right out of high school. I think she was 19. So, she met my dad. They got engaged. They got married. It's what you're supposed to do. Right. And then you start your family. And then you have now we have a lot of these singles that not only I think they're battling with a level of loneliness, are also up against all the shoulds, the social expectations of how they think their life should be going. So I should have a boyfriend or girlfriend in high school, or I should find my husband, in my early 20s, or my wife. I should be married by now. I should have kids by now. I should. And so every time we fall short of one of these shoulds, well, now not only am I dealing with disappointment, I also feel like somehow I'm failing.
But who's giving us the shoulds?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Exactly. Exactly. Where are these shoulds coming from? And so I maybe that's a whole different topic. Maybe that's for hey, if you're listening and you're single, what are you wrestling with the most? Are you wrestling with the fact that you don't truly feel like you should be single, or are you wrestling with the fact that you feel like you're a failure because you're okay being single? There are some people that are single and they're good with it. Right. There are times where I could be like, I could see that, right? You go home to chaos. You know what? Single life, maybe that's not so shabby, at least for a week. And so maybe there's a differentiating factor there of, and I would imagine most singles probably fall into that category of no, I don't like being single.
And it's probably because God's called them to be married.
Correct.
But then the question is, how do you meet somebody? How do you put yourself out there? Yeah. And especially if you are busy and if you have a career or if you're involved in certain things, it makes it difficult. Or if you go to a church that there's only 50 people and there's nobody around. And dating apps, I mean, I think in 2025, they're finding that dating apps are going to be not non-existent, but I mean, there's going to be a major decrease
Oh, really?
in dating apps because they're just not working for
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
And you also have the problem with singles today. Their expectations are incredibly high. I'm sure you've heard the song of "I'm looking for a man in finance, trust fund, 6'5", blue eyes," and they've done the studies, and they're like, that's less than 1% of
Right.
the population. So if you're genuinely, ladies, looking for that, you're not going to find him. It's just not available. But when you have the dating apps, you're looking, well, he's not over 6 feet, so swipe left, right. I don't know, whatever it is that you swipe, and it's only a certain percentage of males on the dating apps that actually get swiped on, because the girls are looking for their expectations are super high. They're looking for well over 100K. And at 22, you're not making over 100K, but they just, because of social media, they have these expectations. And that's adding to a lot of the singleness as well of, I'm just not good enough for the female's expectations. I'm just not good enough for the male's expectations.
Yeah, I think misplaced expectations play a big role, and we know how much social media messes with all of our expectations and all of our comparisons in general. Like, we compare our families. Like, well, that family is much better looking than my family. Those kids are more successful than mine. So it hits us all. So it's not isolated to singles. But I do think that that's a good thing to figure out is, if I'm single and I don't want to be, well, what do I do about it?
Mm-hmm.
What do I do if I'm single and I don't want to be single? You said something Sunday that is actually, I thought was super, super spot on, and that is that if you're waiting for Mr. Right to get some epiphany that you're the one and come find you and knock on your door and you answer like, "Hello, I'm Mr. Right. I've come to find."
The Lord has spoken.
That's
I'm
just
the one.
not real. It's not going to happen.
I wish it happened that way. That'd be awesome.
Oh my goodness. And I agree. I mean, like, I have kids. Arranged marriages aren't the worst idea.
Well, I told my daughter, I said, listen, I will find 5 godly, delicious young men for you. Just pick out of those 5. She's like, absolutely not. I'm like, okay. Trying to help you out, girl.
Yeah. Do your best. So, well, I would say this: it doesn't matter what stage of your life you're in, because I'd say the single message hits a lot of different not just demographics, a lot of different generational seasons.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have a lot of folks here, even that attend our church here at Bayview, that they're on the back end. They're single after a 40 or 50 year marriage, so they've lost a spouse. They're now single. We have a lot of widows here at Bayview. We have a lot of widowers, but a lot of widows.
Mm-hmm.
And I've actually had this conversation. The majority of them are totally fine staying single.
The women, though.
The women. The women. There are a couple of the women that are
and there's
not.
reasons behind that.
Okay.
All right. So when men get married, oftentimes their wife is their best friend.
True.
Oftentimes they don't really hang out a whole lot with other men outside of their wife. They're not. They don't have as many friends. It's just kind of the way men are built. Not everybody has the buddies that they go golfing with every weekend or whatever. So when their wife dies, that hits them harder than it does a woman. And oftentimes excuse my way I phrase this. Oftentimes within about 5 years, I believe, they're remarried.
Interesting.
Men are remarried. Women, most of the time, because they have so many relationships outside of their marriage, that yes, if they are widowed, they're going to be okay because they're not lonely. They have all the relationships. They have all these people that they can talk to, that they can commune with, where the husbands don't have that. So they're least likely to get remarried right away. Yeah. Unless, of course, they have children, then they want a husband around to help with that. But if they're older, a lot of times they'll stay single longer than the husbands will.
And that makes total sense. Yeah, that makes total sense. Because even a lot of the widowers, the males that I talk to that are older, that's what they say. It's just lonely. And I want to come home. I want to have that companion. I want to have my friend back. And I mean, I've observed some situations where it feels like, man, they rushed into it just to fill that slot. Yes. They may not even enjoy it, but they filled it, I mean, so, that's an interesting way to look at it is, I guess that makes a ton of sense. I hadn't thought of it that way before. All right, so let's do this. Let's go down this path, a couple things. What are some things you would advise, or what are some things we would advise if you're single? How do you put yourself out there? What are some good ways or good steps to take?
Well, the biggest thing I mentioned on Sunday was just be about God's business.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, you want to meet a good Christian man, Christian woman. It's you doing what God has called you to do. So my husband and I, yes, we were younger, and so we have a little bit of a different dynamic. But we were both youth leaders in youth group, and we were just serving as youth leaders. And that's how we met. That's how we developed a relationship. That's kind of how we moved forward. I see a lot of missionaries. What happens? They meet their spouse on the mission field.
Yeah.
I notice a lot of pastors, they meet their spouse in whatever ministry capacity that they're working on. So the biggest thing is, what ministry could you get involved in? What about God's business could you get involved in?
That's good. Yeah, and I think that brings up a big topic then too. Maybe this is a crossroads you have to cross. So if you're single and you're listening and you don't want to be single, first of all, we're not a dating service. We have no matchmaking capabilities whatsoever.
I wouldn't mind that, but
I mean, if I could, yes, we'd monetize it in a heartbeat.
Have you seen that TV show? It's the married one, Married at First Sight. Have you seen that?
Oh, I've not seen it. I've seen it advertised.
Let's do a Christian version of that. Listen, we'll set you up.
I have to sign a lot of liability releases.
But anyway, what were you saying?
No, so I'm saying this. I was like, maybe if you're single, I think, and because one thing I've always said is like, listen, I'm not saying God doesn't have somebody for you, but God may be holding off until he sees you're content with just him. And there has to be that. Like Jesus has to be our most important relationship. And maybe the way this kind of plays out more practically is, do you trust God enough to put him first in this situation? Meaning, it's kind of Matthew 6:33, seek first his kingdom and my righteousness, all these things will be added unto you. Are you committed enough to say, okay, God, I trust you enough to say that step one or checkbox one in my list of wants and needs, they've got to be a follower of Jesus.
Right.
That's where I see so sad. It saddens me. I see that so often as that gets taken off the list. I want somebody, you said like on the dating apps, I want somebody to make 100,000. I want somebody that's 6 foot and all these things. And I recently heard on a podcast, they were talking about, they had done a survey, and I'm sure there's dozens of them out there. What are the qualities that women find most attractive?
Yes.
And like, I think the top one was humor.
Yes.
In this list.
Yes.
And then I think like kindness and gentleness was on there. I mean, yeah, somewhere in the middle was a good smile and,
Or even the hobbies. Did you see that one?
I did, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like video games is not on there. It is the least attractive.
Exactly.
But number one was reading, which I found very interesting. I thought like playing an instrument or something would be number one, but it's reading.
Yeah. But that also leads to intimacy and engagement and conversation. And so, but in all those lists, like what I find so often, especially within Christian circles, is they're willing to take the hit on, are they a believer?
Right.
If they can get in a relationship. It's like, that's the most important one.
Well, their expectations are not prioritized correctly.
Yeah.
So because of social media, we have way too high of expectations when we're looking for a mate, but then in other areas, they're too low. So obviously, godly man, godly woman needs to be number one. Did you see the first date list that was the ick? So these women put together 50 first dates that would be considered an ick, and that you wouldn't go on a second date. Number one was the Cheesecake Factory. I'm going, I'm sorry, but if my husband took me to the Cheesecake Factory on our first date, I would have married him the next day. I don't understand how that can be an ick, but so your expectations in this area are just way too high. So what if he wants to go on a coffee date and that's the first date? Like, so a lot of these women are expecting to be treated like a princess, but I'm sorry, you're not acting like one.
Right,
you're not being gracious. But yeah, they're shoving the awesome man of God off the table. Yeah. They're shoving like that he has a couch instead of a futon off the table. Like, come on, like you need to like higher your expectation in some areas and then lower them in others.
Well, and I think hiring your expectation is hiring the standard of who God's called you to be, and think through this filter. Like, you have kids, I have kids. Like it's a tall order. I've got a one of my daughters is married, the other is getting married this summer, and so I've already been down that path where they brought home this this crazy dude that thought he was good enough for my daughter, right?
Yeah.
Like that was a tall order. Like
Yeah.
they were not coming in to a happy dad of like, oh, it's fine. My standard is extremely high. You've got to show me
Right.
that you deserve my little girl. And what I observed in both of these, the son-in-law and the son-in-law to be, is I observed quickly that they are passionate followers of Jesus. So Jesus is first in their life.
Right.
To me, there's nothing higher than that, because I know that is a commitment my daughters have made. And so we go to what Paul tells the church in Corinth. He's like, hey, don't be unequally yoked with an unbeliever. And we dismiss that so quickly in our singleness. And it's like, well, but I'm desperate enough that I'll take my chances. And that's where a lot of singles go. I'll take my chances. They check all the other boxes, right? They're good looking. I find them good looking. They're successful. We get along. We have good compatibility. I've heard this so many times. I mean, they don't really go to church much, but I'm going to get them to church.
No, you're not.
So now we're into missionary dating. Yeah, straight
No,
up.
you're not.
Missionary dating is a 1 in a million.
That's like saying he'll be cured of his pornography addiction if we get married. No, he won't.
No, he won't.
That's not going to happen.
No. And
That's another standard that needs to be high.
Yeah. So does that mean do you help him find help? Does he want help? Yeah, I mean, that's a journey but yeah, take it seriously. It's a big deal. Like that. Like don't mess around with that.
Right.
But the moment you take does he love Jesus more than he loves me? And I think one of my son-in-laws actually said that to me. Like, hey, I love your daughter more than I love Jesus more than I love your daughter.
Yeah.
Boom. That's a big deal. That's awesome. Right. And so that to me, and so if you're listening, man, don't get desperate. I think that's the biggest danger zone, is that I think so many people that are single, they get desperate. And when you're desperate, you lower your standard.
Yes.
And when you lower your standard, you start making sacrifices over who you are, who you're called to be. And it typically leads to pretty bad stuff.
Yes.
So step one is set that standard high. I'd say the second one that is, you allude to it, is where are you looking for this person? I mean, I don't think you're going to have a lot of luck if you're looking for this Jesus loving spouse at 1 a.m. at the local bar. I don't think. I'm not saying it's impossible. Because I know I'll get.
Your chances are pretty low, very low.
Thank you, because I always get comments back, right? Like, well, it worked for us. Okay, again, 1 in a million shot, Doc. 1 in a million. But where are you looking? Where are you putting yourself in position to find these men or these women that maybe God has for you? And I don't know that people always put themselves in the right spots. So you mentioned, where are you serving? Where are you following Jesus' calling on your life? And while you follow Jesus into his calling, if he has a plan for you, then that's where you're going to find it. It's all within the beautiful confines of just kind of being in God's will.
Right.
And finding your way through that.
And oftentimes when you find somebody as you're serving Jesus, they're doing the same thing you are. So there's that commonality.
Yeah.
It's something that you both have in common.
Yeah. No, that's a super good call. So, yeah, and I know it's scary. And so then on the flip side of it, then how can we help? So those of us that are not single, what can we do? Like how can we better love the single people that are in our lives that are feeling lonely, maybe that are battling through some of these things?
I think the biggest thing is to ask them. Ask them outright, because everybody wants something different. Yeah. I've had singles. I had a girlfriend. She's 38. She just got married. And for years, she's been wanting a husband. And I just would say to her, girl, I'm praying for him. I'm praying God brings your husband. And she just went, thank you. And then there's others that are like, please just leave me alone. Yeah. I don't want that pressure. I don't want any of that. And then there's some that are like, hey, I know you know somebody. Can you set me up? Can you arrange? Right. Everybody's different. So I think just asking them, what do you need? I had a girl come up to me Sunday. She's 24. She said, the message hit home. Believe me, I'm praying for my husband every day. I'm like, well, can I pray for him and you right now? And she's like, yes. And so I got to pray with her. But I think it's just asking what they want and then having the single be honest. Yeah. It's okay if you don't want to be single. Yeah. You don't have to be embarrassed to say, yeah, I've got my life in order. I've been seeking Jesus with my whole heart. I've got a career. I've got a house. Like, I'm ready to settle down and I don't know what to do next. Be honest in that. That's okay.
Yeah. And just take yourself off the timeline. Take yourself off the social timeline of like, well, by now you should.
Well, and yes, and everybody's different. So I wasn't raised in the church. I was raised in the world. So I had, coming into Christianity, more of a feminist worldview. So my timeline was, I'm getting married at 28.
Yeah.
Because no man's going to take away from my career and this and that. And I'm not having kids until my 30s and blah, 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 blah. And God brings David into my life. And that was hard. I knew when I was 19 years old, I knew I was going to marry him. And I cried.
Oh, wow.
I went home, like, I just knew. And I cried and I said, Lord, no, not now. I'm only 18. This is going to ruin my life. We were married at 22. And it did not ruin my life. But I just remember being in a sermon about singleness. And the speaker said, whether you feel like you have to be married at 22 or you're desiring to be married at 28, which that was my number. She's like, you just have to submit that to the Lord.
Oh, absolutely.
And that convicted me. And I went, and so I had to, so I know that my situation is a little bit different because more singles are wanting to get married where I was more hesitant. It convicted me enough to say, okay, I have to let God do what he's doing and trust that he has a plan. And that if I am meant to get married young, which I never wanted to do, it's going to work out and it's going to be okay.
Yeah. I think that's a good phrase too, submitting your singleness. And you mentioned that on Sunday as well. Submit this to God. Get out there, follow him. If you're about doing the Jesus business in your life, then you're putting yourself in the position to where he can fulfill what he has for you. But you've got to submit that singleness to God, because there are some of you listening, and we don't have any names or specifics in mind. There are some of you listening that his story for your life may be to always be single. Mm-hmm. I hope that if that's where you are, that he's giving you a peace about that.
Right. And that's, again, you submit that to the Lord and say, I have this desire. If I'm not meant to have it, then Lord, please take it away.
Yeah.
And I said this on Sunday, the Great Commission cannot be accomplished without our singles.
100%.
So many missionaries around the world and even here in the United States that are doing amazing work for Jesus. And it's because they have the freedom to do so.
Oh, that's a good
Paul
point.
in the New Testament would not have been able to do what he did if he were, maybe he would have, I don't know. But from what I see, I don't think he would have been able to do what he did.
Right.
Without.
To drag a wife and kids, so sporadically
or risking
around
them getting killed because of the things that he was doing.
Yeah.
Right?
No, I think that's a great call. And I think that's really the heart behind what he was talking about when he talks about, hey, you have to be content. Mm-hmm. Be content with what the Lord is doing in your life and where he's taking your life. And for some of you, that means being content being single for now. Mm-hmm. For some, it may mean being content with being single forever. Mm-hmm. And for others, it may be finding contentment with him in being single again. And I think those are all very difficult places, but I think contentment is the common thread that brings us peace as we follow Jesus through all of this. Is that okay? I'm going to be content, and don't hold back from him. I tell people all the time, God's a big boy; he can take your feelings. So if you're single and you're just struggling with it, well, let God know it's okay. It's okay if you go home, you're tired of it being quiet. Well, let God know. Talk to him. Tell him what's up. Mm-hmm. He can take it. He wants to hear from his sons and his daughters. But just understand that if he is holding back something right now, it's because it's what's in your best interest. Mm-hmm. And I know that's a terrible cliched thing to say, and I know that hurts and it's hard, but he's going to have a plan. But you've got to be about the business of following him.
And you have to remember there's a bigger picture. Yep. And I remember somebody told me this, and it wasn't about my singleness. It was about something else in my life. And they gave me a word that said, it's not that you're not ready. It's that A, the other people around you aren't ready, and B, the situation, God is moving the chess pieces right now so that way everybody can be ready, if that makes sense what I'm saying. So You may be ready to be married. You're like, Ed, I have the house, I have the career, I have been seeking you, I am free from habitual sin, I have been, sexually pure, all these things, and you're going, I don't understand why the Lord isn't sending me something. I know that I'm ready, and you might be ready. But God has to orchestrate. He sees the bigger picture, and he has to orchestrate some other things around you to make sure that it's set in the right place. or that other person isn't ready.
Yep.
You are ready. So praying for that other person, that they're getting their finances in order and all the things, so they're not bringing the baggage into the marriage.
Yep. I think that's a great way to look at it. And you've been in my office, and I may have shared this before. I actually have a chessboard in my office.
Mm-hmm.
And the first question everybody asks when they come in is sit down, like, oh, do you play chess? I don't. I have no idea how to play chess, which makes it weird. Now, it's a conversation piece. I brought it back. It's from Russia. So, I mean, it's kind of got some fun stories behind it, but I leave it there as my reminder that God is the ultimate chess player, and that the best chess players are 7-8 moves ahead of their opponent at all times.
Yeah.
They know all the scenarios. If he moves here, I'm doing this and this and this. Checkmate. If they do this, I'm going to do this. God's the ultimate chess player, and what you said is so spot on. It may not be that you're not ready, but it may be that the other pieces he's moving are not ready yet. And just let him move the pieces. Let him move the pieces. In the void of all of that, be faithful and be active in following him. Don't sit at home and mope. Be active in following him, doing what he's called you to be. You said a really important thing. We don't even come close to having time to break this down. But there's a difference between God being in charge and God being in control. And it's not actually, that's a very fair biblical statement, because God is not a control freak.
Right.
He gave us free will.
He's not a dictator. We're not on his puppet strings.
We're not robots. Exactly.
Right.
We're not puppets on a string. That's not how this was designed. That's how this whole story started, is God created Adam and Eve, gave them free will. He's sovereign, without a doubt. He is in charge of all things. He has the authority over everything. I mean, we see that even through Jesus Christ. Even the authority over winds and waves. There's nothing they don't have authority over. He chooses to not control freak us because through free will, genuine love is experienced.
Right.
So there is this free will thing. And so within that, you can say, well, God is in charge and I'm going to follow him, and through that trust his sovereignty. But don't just think you're going to sit at home and solve it. On our side, I would say this to those listening, those of us that are not single, to the church as a whole, man, invite them over. Understand that loneliness is a tough thing. If you see somebody, you know they're struggling with loneliness, invite them to your house, invite them out, invite them together. I don't know, set them up on a date. I don't know. Maybe you could be a great matchmaker. I don't know, but do something. Don't just be like, oh, it's terrible, they're single, and move on. Yeah. They, like you said, they want to feel seen. They want to feel heard. They want to feel like, oh, at least you know that I'm here. And I think that's where a lot of them feel, even in church, so isolated, is that we talk past them or we walk past them. And so I think on our end, it's like, yeah, let's help them. Right. Let's help them. I've never been a fan of church being the matchmaker place as far as like us helping do that. So we don't have a singles group. We're not going to have Bayview dating night. We're not going to do that. But there is a place here where I think we can help people find community in the body, and then through that, maybe find that companionship.
But there's plenty of ministries to get involved in here.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can be involved in kids ministry, become a youth leader. I mean, there's so many places that you can get involved in. Yeah.
Hey, if you're in your mid-20s and you want to meet people, join our greeter team. You get to meet every person, hundreds of people every weekend.
And here's this is another thing I would say to the singles. Introversion is not an excuse to put I'm so sick of the whole I'm an introvert and I can't. Yeah. I'm an introvert, I can't ... It's overdone, and it's not an excuse to not meet people.
Yeah. I think it's more fair to say I'm an introvert, so it's hard for me. Sure, I get it.
Legit.
I get it.
Totally legit.
I get it. And there's things and places to do, things to help accomplish that. So I don't know. It's a tough topic. It's not a topic that we can say, hey, let's solve this in 40 minutes. But I think it is something just to just recognize that, and I think the base thing is this: if you're listening and you're lonely and you're single and you feel unseen and you feel unwanted and you feel unheard or whatever it is you're struggling with, understand this, that God has never forgotten you. Right. God has never lost sight of you. He's never forgotten where you are. He's never gotten distracted. He loves you. He knows right where you are, and he knows what you need. He knows your needs. He knows before you ask. And so I just encourage you, just keep crying out to him. If that's the plan, keep following him, be active in following him, do something, get out, serve, put yourself out there. It's interesting because Sunday, after you got done speaking, after the second service, when you got done speaking, I was able to have a quick conversation with a former staff member here at Bayview. and he was on staff here, I want to say 4 years ago, roughly, and maybe a little less than that, 4 years ago or so. And while he was on staff, he was single, and he was the only single person on staff at the time. And there were always those moments where we'd talk about, all right, hey, we're going to get together for a staff get together. Bring your spouses. Oh, sorry, like, come along, go along.
Yeah.
And he didn't want to be single. He wanted that relationship. He wanted to experience marriage, and he was getting, I think late 20s at the time. But he kept trusting God. Like he never was Eeyore about it. He was never sad. He kept putting himself out there. He kept no, I'm going to serve the Lord. I'm going to do this. I loved it because Sunday after the service, I went up to him and I was able to give him a hug, and I was able to say good morning to his wife and his 2 beautiful kids. 4 years later. Yeah. And I remember those conversations like, man, I know you're struggling. I know this isn't easy. But God had the time. And again, that's his story. That was God's story for him. But it was just, to me, it was affirmation. Like, listen, timeline's off. God's got it. He is in charge. Yeah. He's not controlling you, but he is in charge. And there's fulfillment through him, one way, shape, or form. So, cool. Hey, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, good to have you with us, Rachel. Listeners, thanks for being with us as well. If you haven't done so, hit subscribe, whatever platform you're listening on. That way you never miss an episode. We're here each and every week, and we just appreciate your time. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Yeah, it was good.
It's always fun.
We love you. Appreciate your time with us, and we'll see you next week. We are out of here.